Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of the Gripe Session Podcast. I am your host. My name is George S. Monica. And again, what do we talk about during this podcast? We talk about all the things that sometimes make sense, sometimes don't make sense, and the things that we hear every single day. And then we got to gripe about them, right? So first and foremost, I want to thank you for checking out today's episode of the Gripe Session. We definitely appreciate it. But first things first, if you haven't already, follow me on the social medias over here. If you have any questions or concerns that you would like to hit at me or want me to cover on the next edition of a podcast, well then, very simple, shoot me an email right here. Or you want to ask me any other questions, feel free to shoot me a text message or give me a call at this number. And most importantly, if you're watching us on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, either one of them, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you follow us on Apple Podcasts. And if you can, do us a favor, give us a rate and review. Let us know what you think of the podcast so we can keep bringing them to you left and right. And we definitely appreciate that. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's edition of the Gripe Session Podcast.
It's Gripe Session time with your host, George Wanica.
It's about nothing.
Discussing everything from real estate, current events, a little bit of everything, and the annoying little things that just tick you off.
You can't handle the truth.
What? You didn't know?
Here's your host, George Wanica.
Your ass better call somebody.
Thanks everybody for checking out the podcast today. Today we are going to have a conversation about a lot of different things that I've been hearing across media in general, social media, some of the podcasts I listen to, some of the periodicals that are coming out. And one of those simple things has to do with home ownership, right? Home ownership. Everybody wants to own their own home. It's part of the American dream. And it is for a lot of people because it's something that's yours. Now, there are a lot of people, due to the state of the current economy, are sitting back and saying, maybe now is not the best time for you to buy a house. Then on the other side, I see people using all of these expressions, buy the house, you date the rate, right? Which is kind of catchy for agents and things of that nature. And it's a nice way of saying, listen, you're going to buy the house and that's what you're going to have because the rate is something that most people are not going to have over the course of 30 years, which is a normal 30-year mortgage. Now, why is that, George? Well, it's very simple. Most people, or the national average of people, are going to refinance their house anywhere between 3 to 5 times during the time that they're in that property. So a lot of the times, the rate that you initially get is not going to be the rate when all of a sudden you decide to pay the house off, that's going to be the rate at that point. Why is that? Well, people use their house for financial stability. What they do in some cases is they use the equity, they pay down debt, they borrow against the equity that they've had in the house and kind of go from there. So home ownership is always a great thing. But the one thing I consistently don't hear people talking about nowadays, and is rather upsetting, is this one thing. Now, everyone's talking about that the prices and affordability factor for housing is through the roof. Mortgages are higher than they've ever been. And all of that is true. But what people are leaving out in these conversations is the mortgage interest deduction, also known as MID. Now, MID is something that realtors have fought for a lot of years. It is consistently one of the things that the government is trying to take away. Now, why are they trying to take away mortgage interest deduction, George? Well, it's real simple. What mortgage interest deduction, for those of you that don't know, is allows you to take the interest that you pay to the bank at the end of the year and deduct it from your taxable income. So because you're able to do that, you're now taxed at a lower base than what you would normally be potentially taxed at, depending on where your tax base is. So nobody is ever talking about the mortgage interest deduction in all of these recent things that I've heard having to do with housing as well as housing affordability. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the reason they're not talking about that is because it changes the narrative now. Now, here's another reason that promotes home ownership. Yes. Are payments high? 100%. Should people look at their affordability and what they can afford? 100%. When I started off in the real estate business, what used to happen was people used to start off on the low side. They would buy, if they couldn't afford a detached house, they go to a semi-attached. If they couldn't afford a semi, they go to an attached. If they couldn't afford an attached, they go to a condo, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, nowadays, we've started to get into the type of a society of instant gratification, where we want the detached house. We don't want to take our steps and build ourselves up to that level. Now, there's nothing wrong with building yourself up, and there's nothing wrong to want to aspire to get the detached house. But as housing affordability starts to get up with our interest rates like they're doing right now, I'm predicting that you're going to see more people starting to go back to the build-up section. And we as realtors and the people that watch this, my colleagues that are realtors, we should be having conversations about what they can afford as opposed to what they want. Because affordability and wants are two different things. And getting somebody potentially into a house so they can build up in a couple of years, okay, and then get themselves the detached house that they want, might be the best option for those people. Now, again, everything depends on people's affordability and what they make and their qualifications. So one of the things that I do want people to understand, though, is that mortgage interest deduction, okay? And again, any questions on that, you can Google it, GTS it, right? We said talk about Googling that shit. Well, you could GTS it, or if you have any other questions on the mortgage interest deduction, well, then guess what? All you got to do, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, reach out to me on one of the social medias that you see on the side. But I want to thank everybody for coming on and checking out the podcast again today. For those of you that listen on your podcast app, as well as those who was going to watch us on YouTube, I definitely appreciate the support. We definitely appreciate a lot of the comments. We've gotten a lot more downloads lately. So make sure you do one thing for me, please. If you got any value out of this, make sure you share this podcast with somebody. Let them know about it. And if you'd be so kind, hell, give us a rate or review on Apple Podcasts, because the more rate and reviews that we get from you lets people know that, you know what, he's doing a halfway decent job. We want to let people know about this podcast, and we can help more people as we move on. With that being said, I want to thank you for checking out today's version of the Gripe Session. And remember one thing, always do something nice for somebody you wouldn't normally do, and we'll catch you on the next edition of the Gripe Session. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Gripe Session. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.